Hey guys, back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today is a Q&A episode, and I have some questions I'm going to dive into. But first, before I go into that, I just want to go over. So I have my free body recomp checklist, and with that body recomp checklist, I go over 10 things you need for body recomp, why it's important to focus on body composition, the two types of body recomp, and again, everything you need to know about a body recomp. So that is in the show notes. And again, it's completely free. So with that out of the way, let's dive into today's topic and its our questions. And the first one is around managing hunger. This has just been a common, this I didn't have one specific question, but it was around managing hunger, what to do. And then there was also an interesting study that I recently came across. It's not a new study that I think it's really can show the importance of managing stress. So I'm going to dive into that. Before I dive into that though, I just want to go over with hunger. It's this interesting thing, right? A lot of people think hunger is this negative thing, but to me, it's not always a bad thing. And hunger could technically be a good thing. Now, it's also driven by physical and psychological input. So there are physical things, but there are obviously psychological side of things as well too. And we need to understand that we're wired to want a lot of calories for the least amount of energy burn. So this is why it's so hard to manage hyperpalatable, calorie dense type foods. Like we're wired for that. But I also think when it comes to hunger too, it's important to know one, how hungry are you? Is it at all times? What does this look like? But I think the big thing being like hunger is not necessarily always a bad thing. I think it can technically be because that means your body needs fuel. And it could be from high energy output from training or whatever it may be. Again, that's not the worst thing, but we need to make sure we manage it, right? There's some things that go on that can help make hunger worse or it can help improve it there, right? So a few things that are going to contribute to hunger are going to be activity levels. So too much higher energy expenditure is going to increase hunger. Again, this is not a bad thing though. It really depends on your phase. If we have too much hunger and we're in, but it's from the fact that we're moving a lot, but we're in a fat loss phase. Again, that's not necessarily good or bad, but we do need to make sure we match our food to that there. We still want to be in a deficit, but we need a match. Now, if we're in a phase where we're at maintenance or higher, increased hunger and we're moving a lot, probably not a bad thing because that's going to allow you to eat more food. Now, on the flip side, too little is going to lead to some appetite dysregulation. Moving too little can also contribute to higher hunger levels. So that sweet spot's going to be getting around 8 to 12K steps per day, getting 3 to 4 weight training workouts in and a couple conditioning sessions in. And that's going to be that sweet spot there. Sleep quality is going to impact it. So poor sleep can obviously impact hunger. This is going to impact some people more than others. But again, look at your sleep quality there. Stress. So stress is going to be huge. High stress can either blunt appetite or increase cravings, especially for calorie dense foods. But for some people, it will blunt appetite. But what typically happens is you're still crave calorie dense foods later on, and you're still going to prefer more calorie dense foods, even if it does blunt your appetite. But for some people, it really increases their cravings and they're in big trouble there. So we definitely want to look at that. But stress in general, I also think zaps willpower. So you're less likely to make good decisions. Again, for some people, high stress means that now you're less likely to want to go do things that you need to do for your health, whether that's movement or make food. So stress is something that I think it directly impacts it, but also indirectly as well too. Obviously, calorically dense, low volume foods are going to make you hungrier. Again, it's easy to overeat those types of foods and it's hard to fill up, so you're going to be hungrier. Food environment, so constant exposure to tasty foods and seeing them, obviously that's going to increase your hunger as well too. Fat loss dieting, so calorie deficits, getting leaner. In general, these are things that are going to increase your hunger. Faster rate of loss, so the quicker you lose weight, going to lead to more hunger. We can use some refeeds and diet breaks to help mitigate that. Your regular meal timing, so skipping meals or eating at consistent intervals can lead to intense hunger later on. But again, skipping meals, hey, I'm going to skip this meal to save calories, or hey, I'm going to skip this meal so I don't have as many calories. Again, that's going to be something that's going to ramp up hunger on there. Body fat levels, right? High body fat can blunt satiety cues. So the higher your body fat is, that can make you more hungry. But also on the flip side, very low body fat is going to increase the drive to eat as well too there. So we want to get you in that sweet spot most of the time. Genetics, I think some people are going to be more predisposed to higher hunger than others. And so we just need and just have higher food reward sensitivity in general, right? Obviously, all these other things are going to make that better or but generally speaking, some people are just going to naturally have more hunger than others. And then hydration. Dehydration can be mistaken for hunger and it can increase cravings and appetite if neglected. Menstrual cycle. So hunger naturally increases during certain phases. So that phase leading up to the bleed, probably going to, for most people, increase hunger. So we want to look at that. And so again, the menstrual cycle, and then certain medications, right? Things like antidepressants, steroids can influence hunger, especially during changes. So with that, let's dive into how do we manage it? What are some practical things that we can do here? So First, I think it needs to be from an expectation standpoint. We need to expect some hunger, especially in fat loss phases. That's essentially the cost of doing business. And as I said, being hungry doesn't necessarily mean something's wrong. And I think it's a good skill to practice tolerating mild hunger without panic or urgency. So again, in a fat loss phase, we need to expect some hunger. That's the cost of doing business, a sign that you're dropping body fat. If you're never hungry, you're likely not losing body fat as you would like. And then as I said, it doesn't necessarily always mean something's wrong. It could mean you're getting close to your next meal. It could mean that, hey, you just need energy, which again is not necessarily a bad thing, especially if you pair it with high movement. And then most people just need to practice tolerating some mild hunger without panic or urgency. It's again not a sign that we need to have to go eat because we're a little bit hungry. I think it's a good skill to have. We want to regulate our circadian rhythm. We obviously want to dial in meal timing, specifically around sleep, making sure that you're not having super high, like tasty, calorically dense, heavy meals. Get your meal timing somewhat consistent from day to day. Sleep regularity. So, going to sleep around the same time each night, waking up around the same day. This can help regulate hunger. And then your light environment is also important as well, too. So making sure you get sunlight in the morning, and then at night, you're limiting blue light exposure, screen time, etc. there. And this can help regulate your circadian rhythm, which is going to make your hunger more consistent and natural. Stay active. As we talked about, movement supports appetite regulation. It can also prevent bored eating, right? It's like you're moving, doing stuff, so you're less likely to bored eat. And again, there's that inverted U, right? So too much activity may raise hunger, but then again, that's not necessarily the bad thing. We just need to adjust our caloric intake, but we need to make sure that we're not just slamming down calorically dense foods because we're moving more. That ideal range is, again, 8 to 12K steps per day. We want to eat full meals, not snacks. So reduce grazing and mindless snacking. Snacks are often calorie dense and not filling, so you just continue to want more and more there with that. So again, we want to have mostly full meals and not snacks. Increasing your protein. So again, you obviously hit your daily goal, whatever that is, and going above it can help on higher hunger days. It's the most satiating macronutrient. And again, if you're going to overeat a macro, ideally it would be protein. But this can really, on days that you are extra hungry, maybe you ramp up your protein a bit more there. Prioritize high volume, low calorie foods. Vegetables, fruits, whole grains, legumes. These are going to stretch the stomach, increase satiety, and reduce calorie density. And so this can help you manage appetite without overconsumption. So you're going to feel fuller and be less likely to consume more calories. We want to stay hydrated. So drink water and calorie-free beverages. Avoid sugary drinks or drinking calories, as these can blunt hunger. By staying hydrated, it can blunt hunger and reduce cravings because we're staying full, right? And we can use calorie-free beverages as a way to help potentially lower cravings too. So again, we want to make sure we stay hydrated. Don't overlook electrolytes either, especially if you sweat a lot and have low sodium intake in general. We want to eat slowly and mindfully. So this gives the brain time to register fullness. And this can also improve meal satisfaction and portion control. Really slowing down, being intentional with when you're eating versus just eating on the go. Manage stress. So just really the key here is finding 5 to 10 minutes per day to just slow down. That could be breath work, it could be walks, journaling, music, whatever it is. Just find some time to slow down throughout your day, and that's going to help you manage stress. And this can help reduce emotionally driven eating, and it also improves decision making. And I'm going to come back to this here in a little bit. We definitely want to make sure we manage your stress load. That's going to be key because, again, that's going to help you slow down. And stress can be something that, as we talked about earlier, can really increase your cravings for tasty foods, and those are going to be harder to manage, especially when you're stressed. Front load calories and protein. So high protein breakfast may reduce hunger and cravings later in the day. And this sets up better blood sugar regulation and appetite control. So instead of saving your calories for later, try and eat more calories early in the day and have those meals be higher in protein, and that can help manage hunger throughout the day there. So those are some things we can do. Now, I did want to bring up an interesting study that I recently came across. So basically it was from 2008 by Shu et al., and it was glycemic instability and spontaneous energy intake association with knowledge-based work. Basically what they showed is this study showed that knowledge-based work acutely induces an increase in spontaneous energy intake and promotes an increased fluctuation in plasma glucose and insulin levels. This study contributes to the documentation of a new risk factor for positive energy balance with the potential to lead to overweight in the long term. So basically what they found in it is that despite similar energy expenditures across conditions, so doing this knowledge-based work, this cognitive demanding work, it didn't necessarily increase energy expenditure. However, after they had two groups, and the group that did this knowledge-based work, the energy intake was significantly higher than after someone who just rested, right? So they consumed approximately 200 to 250 calories more. So again, this increase occurred without corresponding rises in subjective hunger rating. So they weren't necessarily more hungry, and participants didn't compensate by reducing energy intake at a meal later in the day. So it essentially just added more calories into their day, right? And the participants felt mentally spent and fairly stressed out after the cognitive demanding tasks. And this led to them over consuming energy. So to me, what does this mean for you is mental fatigue and cognitively demanding tasks can drive overeating. Why is that? Stress plus fatigue equals reduced self-control. So cognitive effort fatigues the same brain areas responsible for impulse control, decision making, and motivation. So you just means you're just more likely to say screw it to your meal plans, skip the gym, or snack even if you're not hungry. That stress and that fatigue just lowers your ability to make these more informed decisions. Dopamine goes down, adenosine goes up. Mental fatigue dampens dopamine, which means you have less motivation, and it increases adenosine, which means more tiredness. So food becomes more appealing as a quick reward, and efforts like cooking or training feels much harder to. And then there's stress eating, not hunger eating. People often eat more after mentally demanding tasks, not because they're hungry, but because eating helps relieve cognitive, emotional tension. And as we found in that study, participants ate 200 to 250 extra calories after these cognitive tasks, despite no increase in hunger. So what does this mean for you specifically here? Pre-planned meals to avoid temptations. Stay hydrated. Make sure you're staying hydrated during these demanding tasks. Have meals ready to go. Hey, I'm going to have a busy day at work. I'm going to have something that's going to be mentally demanding from a cognitive standpoint, studying, some sort of work, whatever that may be. Hey, I need to have some meals ready to go afterwards. Exercise, right? You can take a nice walk afterwards. You can do a 5 to 10 minute HIIT session, and that can help lower the risk of over consuming these calories. And then just again, stress management, right? So breath work, walk outside, sitting in nature, whatever it is for you, doing some sort of stress management technique afterwards can be super helpful here. But I thought that was an interesting study to really point out how, from a mental standpoint, it can really impact you there. All right. So that's it for that one. Now, next question I have was around, do you have clients work on phases where they don't track? And I thought this was a great question because in tracking calories and macros, right? And 100%, this is ultimately, I want to get clients to a point where they don't feel like they have to track calories and macros if they don't want to. If there's certain phases that they do want to, that's fine. Obviously, we're going to do that. But eventually, I want to get clients to the point where you don't have to do that. Now, I do think there's some benefit to tracking off the bat. And so I'm going to talk about the benefits of tracking, why I think doing some tracking for a bit of time is important. But then I'm also going to talk about the downsides of tracking. And then I'll talk about how we can get you to a point where you don't necessarily have to track 24/7 on here. Again, there's no magic to tracking calories or macros because really at the end of the day, what you actually put in your mouth is the most important. But I do feel like if you understand why you're tracking, you're going to be more likely to stick with it. Right. Tracking is going to really bring awareness, accountability, and education. So most people are going to misjudge how much they eat, especially if they're not tracking these things. So again, if you don't really have any skill around this, it's going to be super easy to misjudge how much you eat. And even if you have tracked in the past, it still can be very hard, especially with today's modern environment of the types of foods that we have around. And so again, you can quote unquote, so there's that, right? Like it's easy to overeat with the types of foods, but let's say you eat healthy, but it's still easy you can still overconsume calories if we're not eating in the right amounts, right? So you could be eating healthy, but again, how much you eat is going to dictate body comp change. Tracking is going to show you what's actually happening. That's something objective. Now, there's, again, downsides to it, which we'll talk about, but it is going to give us some sort of objective data on there. And again, it also brings awareness and consistency and accountability, right? So it's going to bring that awareness. You're going to have a better idea of what you're eating, how many calories you're eating. It's going to allow you to stay consistent with that, especially if you have certain numbers you need to hit. And then again, it's going to give you that accountability because it's like, I really don't want to put down that I ate 3,000 calories worth of cookies. So I'm probably just not going to do that. But obviously, there's certain situations where people do that and then they don't put it down. And that's where really it comes down to what we actually put in our mouth and what we actually eat is really the most important. And that's where tracking calories can go wrong there with that. Again, why it works, what gets measured gets managed. It helps align intake with your goals. It can prevent accidental under or overeating. Again, it can help also improve performance and body comp because this can help us balance out our macros and making sure we're getting the right amount of macros. And we can make adjustments based on real data, not guesswork. Because if we don't have the data, I've been eating chicken, broccoli, and rice every day. Or again, you ask someone what they typically eat. I have a protein heavy meal in the morning. I have like a protein, a salad for lunch, and then I have some meat, veggie, and potatoes at night. It's okay, that's good. What did you have yesterday? Yesterday was a little bit different. I had to go out to eat I had to skip breakfast. So it's okay. We need to see what's actually going on here with that. But again, it can help prevent accidental under or overeating. So it's, hey, you're making the right food choices, but are you eating the right amount for what your current goal is there? It can give us portion clarity and pattern recognition. We get to see what's really in your meal. So again, healthy, quote unquote, healthy choices can be calorie dense smoothies, salads, oils. And so tracking can reveal patterns that can stall progress and it helps avoid hidden calorie creep. So again, it's, hey, I ate a salad yesterday. They think that was a good choice, but then you look at the salad and it was like fried chicken, bunch of ranch dressing, cheese, salami, croutons, and iceberg lettuce. So it's, yeah, you got some food volume, but you also got a lot of calories too, right? So again, it can help us be more specific in terms of what's actually going on there. And it can teach food education and flexibility. We can learn which foods are more calorie dense, more protein rich, more carb rich, etc. It can remove guilt around food choices, and it can show us that there's a time and place for anything. You can also plan around meals out or social events, and it encourages more flexible eating, not food rules. However, too much flexibility can be problematic for some. But again, it's going to give us that flexibility to be able to fit in foods that we want to have. It gives us data for smarter decisions. Again, it's something objective to measure, even though we know calorie tracking isn't necessarily perfect. We can identify specific things and needs based on what you're tracking. You can avoid spinning your wheels with random adjustments because, again, if you don't know what you're eating, it's hard to be like, you need to do less of this or more of that. And it can support long-term behavior change through awareness in terms of what you're eating. Now, those are the plus sides. There's definitely some downsides to tracking calories and macros. It can be tedious. It can lead to trying to be overly perfect. I went 5 calories over. Oh crap, I'm terrible. And we don't need to be that perfect with things. There's tracking errors. Tracking is not a perfect science. And so there's things that can go on there with that. It can lead to that all or nothing mindset, kind of like I was talking about. It can lead to macro Tetris. So you're basically trying to like make these weird food combinations. Hey, I need something that has 5.6 grams of carbs, 8.4 grams of protein, and 19.6 grams of fat. Okay. Again, we don't need to be that perfect with it right there, but it can lead to that. Again, because it's tedious and all these things, it can be mentally draining over time. You can lose sight of your body's like natural needs if you're just eating for whatever you need to put into your app. And you can feel off plan if you're not tracking, but we can still be on track. So again, it leads to that kind of all or nothing where it's I can't track or I didn't track, so now I'm off plan, when it's like what you put in your mouth is the most important here. And tracking isn't forever. We want to use it when you need it. Eventually, that's where I want to get you to. So again, tracking doesn't necessarily have to be forever if you don't want it to. Again, you can do it periodically to recalibrate. You can back off during certain phases or high stress phases, but you can track during body comp pushes, right? So there's different ways that we can go about this. And maybe you stop tracking for a little while. Now you need to bring back some awareness, and you can do it that way. So again, I think the big thing is tracking doesn't have to be forever. And how I want to kind of transition this now is, okay, so we know the pros, why we would track, why we don't want to track, or why tracking isn't always great, and it can lead to that. And so eventually we want to get clients to a point to where they don't have to track 24/7, right? And that's where I lead to this autopilot nutrition. And so eventually, again, I want to get clients to the point to where they don't feel like they have to track every last little bit of food. If you don't want to, of course, you can do certain phases, or we can learn how to push our body comp with or without tracking calories. I think the big thing being here is you're still going to have to make sacrifices and choices with food. There's never going to be a point where you can just do what you want, when you want, and how often you want. So again, going to autopilot doesn't mean nutrition is necessarily going to be easy. Again, anytime we want to, especially in today's modern environment, we need to have if we want to maintain a certain body composition or improve our body composition, we have to have some sort of sacrifice around nutrition. So what would be some times we wouldn't track? You don't need precision at the moment. You just mentally need a break from tracking. You still want to make progress though without logging everything. You've developed the skills to be more in quote unquote intuitive. And again, you can combine some of these tips with tracking, right? If it's like some of these things I'm going to talk about here, you combine some of these with tracking as well too, if you decide you want to do it there. But again, the big thing being like, you just want to take a break. You don't need precision at the moment. There's different ways that we can go about this. So one thing you could do is you could try food journaling without calorie counting. So just log what you ate, when you ate it, how you felt. And again, this can help us identify food quality and meal timing. So again, if you don't want to track like serving sizes, etc., this can be super helpful here with this. It can identify emotional eating or energy dips, and it can build mindfulness without tracking numbers. So this is a way to still track what you're eating, but not necessarily every last gram of what you're eating. The foundation, we need to focus on key habits and foundational habits. So one is, hey, we need to learn how to build each meal with a source of protein and build each meal around protein, right? Maybe it's you just weigh out calorie dense foods. So then that way you don't overeat those. We need to make sure we stay hydrated. Learning how to stop eating it around 80% full versus feeling stuffed, right? Include at least one serving of fruit and veggies per meal, really slowing down when eating meals like undistracted, choosing more food volume type foods, still having some calorie dense foods. And these are habits that we're going to be building over time. And now we're going to rely on these a bit more. And this can allow you to get away from having to track every last little bit, because the reason being what these are going to do is these are naturally going to get you to moderate your caloric intake and be more in line with your brain's and your body's natural cues when it comes to hunger. Again, that's a big thing here. And again, one of the downsides with tracking is you don't really truly get to listen to your body. And because again, like if we're always tracking, we're not looking at that. But then also the food environment, the types of foods we eat are going to hijack our brain to where everything is out of sync. And so by doing these habits, that's going to get you more in sync there. And again, you're going to moderate things in much better. And again, also movement too, like making sure you're doing the right amount of training and getting movement in, etc. Planning ahead and setting structures, basically having 1 to 2 meals per day that are the same for multiple weeks on end. That can help anchor it. I personally like to have clients set how many meals they're going to eat per day. So again, this has allowed me to not have to track during this fat loss phase and not track for the last couple of years is, hey, I'm eating 4 meals per day, I'm sticking to that around the same times. Maybe it changes a little bit, but having that set meal structure gives me that flexibility to eat without having to track. So again, getting that dialed in, but also having out of those 4 meals, having 1 or 2 of them at any one time be the same all the time. Sometimes I've gone up to even 3 meals at a time are the same. And then that fourth one's a little bit more variable. But again, most of the time it's like on rotation of something. Avoiding grazing and reactive snacking. So again, we're not just eating because something's there. We're going to be conscious of our choice around it. Again, every once in a while it's fine, but if we're constantly just eating because something's there, again, it's going to be hard to not track our food and see the body count change we want. Again, main thing here is we want to keep decisions simple and repeatable, and that allows us to, in combination with all those things there that I just talked about, right? The foundational habits. Another thing is, again, making sure you get protein plus fiber dialed in. So aim for about 25 to 30 grams of protein per meal, but also include high fiber foods throughout the day. These 2 habits support satiety, which means you're less likely to overconsume calories. You could also do like time restricted feeding. This is more optional, but again, eating within a certain window, somewhere between 8 and 12 hours. Again, this has been shown to reduce calorie intake in research. It probably works best if you do it earlier in the day versus later in the day. So instead of doing 2 to 8 or 2 to 10, do 10 to 6 or 8 to 4 or 9 to 5 or something like that, right? But again, we still need to prioritize protein and food quality. And I will say this is probably a little bit more useful during fat loss phases, but it can be used during builds as well too outside. If you just have to make sure training's in that window, then we just need to make sure we're eating enough. And I'm going to get to this, where there's still certain things that we do want to track during this time. So again, this is something I did where like, it wasn't for me, it's not a set time. It's just, hey, I'm not going to be eating super late in the night and then eating super early in the day. I usually keep my eating window between 10 to 12 hours. And that's been super helpful there. As I said, we still need to track some things. So tracking body weight and steps can be super helpful because these trends are going to help guide whether your non-tracking or calorie tracking approach is working. We need to look at your body weight, we need to look at steps, and we need to see where your weight's trending. If it's trending up too quickly, well, we're consuming too many calories somewhere. And again, if we've dialed in how many meals we're eating per day, we can start to be a little bit more strategic in terms of taking things out there. So again, if we're not progressing in the way you want, you can adjust meal portions, right? So we just talked about that. We can trim snacks. Maybe you're letting more of those in. Maybe you reduce calorie dense extra type stuff that you're throwing in. Maybe you need to recalibrate and track for a bit and then figure out if certain phases work better for tracking or not for you specifically. So that's how we would do this. Like we still want to track some metrics there to make sure things are headed in the right direction, because at the end of the day, we can't just not track anything. So we're always going to track those things at a minimum. And then again, you could try this for a while and maybe you do this for 8 months, and then 3 months you start tracking for a little bit, and then now you go back to 9 to 10 months, and then eventually you get to the point to where, hey, I really don't feel like I ever need to track again. And again, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. You could not track for 2 years and then track for 6 months. Again, maybe you're trying to push fat loss a bit more, right? So there's so many different ways we can go about it, but the key thing being is I want to get clients to the point where they don't feel like they need to rely on tracking. So again, tracking calories can be the most accurate short-term tool and awareness builder, but again, we need to both need structures, like both ways, tracking or not tracking, in terms of tracking calories, just in different forms. And again, as I said, we need some form of tracking for nutrition in today's environment. So whether that be how many meals you eat per day, whether that be your weight and steps, right? Still need to track in today's modern environment. And so ideally, we want to get clients to less hands-on tracking, but if you enjoy it, then obviously you can keep doing that. Again, calories still matter no matter what. How we get there is really what we can be flexible with over time there. All right, so final few questions. I had a few questions on my fat loss phase. So what's my training like during fat loss? And so right now I'm doing 3 full body lifting days, usually Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Ends up being about 6 to 10 sets per muscle group. I'm doing 3 conditioning days. So I'm doing Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. One's like an interval session. Another one's my other 2 now I'm doing closer to like zone 3. They're just based on what I've been learning about cardio. And then I do hockey 1 time a week, and then 8-ish K steps per day there. And then I was asked how many calories I eat per day. And as I just talked about, I'm not tracking during this fat loss phase. So I would say my calories are probably between 2,000 and 2,400. And I've hit a plateau with it from not tracking. So now I'll talk about this in a minute, but I would say my calories are somewhere between there on average, just based on previous experience tracking there. But again, I'm looking at body weight, seeing where that's trending. And so the final question was, how long have I been doing it and how much longer? So this initial phase has been 12 weeks. And now I'm eating closer to maintenance for a few weeks. And then I'm going to decide if I'm going to pick things back up and push to go a little bit lower. I'm not sure how long that second push would be, but really I'm at this kind of crossroads, as I talked about on my last podcast. I'm at this crossroads of, do I need to get leaner? Do I want to continue to make the sacrifices I need to get leaner? And these are questions I'm still pondering with there. Do I just want to get back to feeling myself and really pushing training there? And so I'll figure that out over the next couple of weeks. Now, definitely, this is the most lax I've been about fat loss. And I just think it just shows where I'm at. I don't necessarily need to be super lean right now. I just need to have good enough body comp and then maintain that. And if I ever need to push, I can certainly do that in the future and go back to tracking and stuff like that if I need to. That's it for this episode. I hope this was insightful. If you found this podcast to be helpful in any way, if you could leave a rating and review, that will help more people find it. And then if you haven't yet, give me a follow on Instagram, Jeff, HOEHN_. That's where I'm most active. And I'll talk to you guys soon.